Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. It is time for our monthly edition of What's New at Ancestry, and we have a lot of content to discuss today, so we're going to just go ahead and dive right in. We're going to start with a quick look at upcoming events. Starting tomorrow, here in Salt Lake City is Roots Tech, and for those of you who are in or near the area, I encourage you to come join us. For those of you who are not, they will be live streaming some of the sessions directly from the conference. So if you go to rootstech.org, you can get information about how to watch the live streaming sessions of some of the conference events and classes over the course of the next several days. I will be speaking at that event several times. I'm also going to be working in the booth, the Ancestry booth, so if you are in attendance at the conference with 10,000 of your closest genealogy friends, I would encourage you to come by and say hello. I would love to meet you. Listed there are some of the other events that Ancestry will be attending in 2016. So we've got an event in the UK, the National Genealogical Society's annual conference coming up in May in Fort Lauderdale. Excuse me, registration is open for NGS, so you're going to want to go to their website, check it out, and see if you are interested in attending and get registered for that fairly quickly. Southern California Genealogy Jamboree is coming up. It's the same weekend in June every year at the same convention center next to the airport in Burbank, and it's a really good time. The International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies annual conference will be in Seattle this year, and then the Federation of Genealogical Societies annual conference will be in Springfield, Illinois. Now, the FGS conference registration has not yet opened, but their hotel registration has. So if you've decided or think you might want to attend that conference in Springfield, I would encourage you to visit the FGS conference website so that you can register for a hotel room at the conference rate before those are all gone. So those are some of the events that Ancestry will be attending in 2016. We do have some other events that are in process. There are a lot of other genealogical events going around the country that Ancestry will not be attending, but I would encourage you to check with your local and state genealogical societies to see what events they're hosting that would help further your genealogy education. Okay, let's talk about content. There is a lot to talk about in content. Ancestry released or published more than 145 million new records over the course of the last month. I've typed that now. I've said it out loud. I've looked at the number a few times. Still kind of blows my mind. 145 million new records added. So here are the countries that are most highly represented in that 145 million records. We've got records from England, a lot of records from Germany and Mexico and Australia, and some from the United States. So we're going to take a look at some of these records before we look specifically at the records. For those of you who've never joined us for a What's New episode before, I just want to make sure that you know where to find or keep up with those new record collections as they come online. On Ancestry, if you click on your search button up here in the menu, you're going to have a card catalog option. Go ahead and select that. And then once you get to the card catalog, the default sort on the card catalog is by popularity. But you can change that to date added. And what that does is it puts everything in chronological order with the newest records at the top of the list. So I'm actually going to jump to page 2. We're going to start at the beginning of last month and work our way through some of these record collections. So we released 4.5 million records from Northamptonshire, England, and that's going to be baptisms, marriages, and burials from 1532 to 1812. Okay, we'll take a quick look at that. And then there's also going to be a set of just marriage registers or those parish records for marriages from 1754 through 1912. Now you'll notice as I hover over the title of each of these databases, I get a little pop-up card And that pop-up card tells me the date that Ancestry published those collections. In this case, they were published on January 5th. That's an easy way to keep track of what's new. If you just set yourself a little calendar reminder, or have a part of your routine that every Monday or every other Monday or whatever, you come in and look at the new record collections. You can keep up that way. Now, one of the questions I get asked by new people quite a lot is, well, why do I care what's new? Won't it just show up as a shaky leaf when Ancestry adds it? And the easy answer to that is no, it will not. And here's why. Ancestry has a set of servers that is dedicated to our hinting process. And we only point about 10% of our most popular databases to those hinting servers to be used in the hint process. The hints, the little shaky leaf hints, are designed as just a way to get you started learning about any particular ancestor. They are not meant to be a reasonably exhaustive search, which is the genealogical standard. They are just meant to get you started. So you do still have to search. Well, Ancestry has more than 16 billion records online, and you can see we're adding millions and millions of records additionally every single day. So the search process sometimes gets a little crazy, right? Because to search for a single person in 6 billion records, you're going to get a lot of search results because people's names are not unique. Even times and places aren't always unique. And so one of the best ways to search the databases on Ancestry is to actually search the individual databases. So if you know, for example, that your family came from this area of England and lived there during this specific time period, the easiest thing to do is to come into one of these databases specifically and search a little bit more broadly. So when I do what I call a global search, when I'm searching all 16 billion records, or 6 billion records, I usually do that search directly from my tree, where I just let the search process be populated automatically by the information in my tree. But when I'm doing a database-specific search, I come in here and actually add the information that I'm interested in. And typically at this level, the less information that I enter, the better. So for example, if I know that I'm looking for a Smith family and the person that I'm looking for was born in about 1802, that may be all I put into the search engine for this specific database just to see what pops up. So you'll see here I've got 716 search results. Well, really I'm interested in all Smiths who have parents named John and Mary. And I'm going to broaden that a little bit because I know John and Mary were having children for a few years around that time period. And now I've narrowed it down to, 85. Well, maybe I'm specifically looking for those, helps if I spell it correctly. And I'm specifically looking for those Smiths who are children of John and Mary who were born in Sewell, and I probably am pronouncing that incorrectly, but I can then just do these iterative searches on a specific database, and now I've got a list of 8 records that came up for baptisms of children of John and Mary in that specific parish. And it gives me a way then to go and actually look at those records one at a time. And in the case of these parish records, I love parish records in England. They're so detailed and fabulous, and you get this gorgeous old handwriting. I can then come in here and look at the original image, make sure I got all of the information off of it, make sure that there's nothing contextual that gives me more information, make sure that the information was read correctly by the indexer. Lots of really great information in these old parish registers. So that's how I utilize the database-specific search. I'm really excited about these particular records for England. Again, it's 4.5 million parish registers dating from 1532 to 1912, contains baptisms, marriages, and burials for that specific parish. Okay, let's go back here to page 1 of our card catalog search results. We're just going to keep working our way up this list. The next set of records I want to highlight is this U.S. departing passenger and crew lists from 1914 to 1962. Now, a lot of you are familiar with incoming passenger lists into New York, whether it was during the time period of Castle Garden or Ellis Island or JFK, whatever the case may be, those incoming passenger lists, Philadelphia, Boston, lots of different ports where we have incoming passenger lists. And historically, the United States did not keep track of who left the country. So there's not a lot of records in the 1800s about who got on the ship and went back to England or back to Italy or whatever the case may be. But this particular set of records is for 1914 through 1962, and it is departing passenger and crew lists. Okay, so this is for people who are returning or leaving the country, and they were forms that were filled out and turned over then to the Immigration and Naturalization Services, who has turned them over to the National Archives, and Ancestry has now digitized those. Now, in the case of crew lists, so if you have an ancestor or a relative who worked on a ship, it will typically include information about their military rank, if they held one, their occupation, their specific job. For any passengers and crew, it will also include information about birthplace and citizenship and age and country of residence. So if they weren't residents of the United States, for example, a lot of Italians in the early part of the 1900s were the migrant workers of their day. And so the men and the boys would come to the United States and work and then go back to Italy. And then a year or two later, they'd come back and work and then go back to Italy. I have seen some of those family records where some of those men have gone back and forth 7, 8, and 9 times and never eventually settled in the United States. And maybe one or two of their sons or daughters decided to eventually immigrate and settle in the United States. But the father and some of those older brothers maybe never did. And so this is a good way to track some of that back and forth movement. Another misnomer is that sometimes our ancestors came from the old country and then never returned. And it surprises me how often that proves to be untrue. People oftentimes went back depending on where they were from and the conditions under which they left. And so it's worth investigating if you have family from another country who may have returned to that country during the time period of 1914 through 1962. Keep in mind also that people traveled for business reasons, for holidays, lots of different reasons. Now I'm going to point out something here on this particular database that is important in all Ancestry databases that have images. If the database has images, over here on the right-hand side, you're going to see a box called Browse this collection. What that does is it allows you to see what's included specifically in the collection. So rather than just jumping in and starting to search, check and see if the records you might be interested in even exist in the database. So in this case, you'll see there's only a limited number of states. That's because these are passenger lists, and so they have to be near a port, likely. And so you can see the different locations for that. So we've got New York here, for example. And then we have the Port of New York, but it is only for the years 1948 through 1946. So even though the database has records that cover starting in 1914, the specific locations may have a much narrower range. And the browse is one of the ways that you can see that. And so that's fantastic because it allows you to really quickly just check and again see if the records that you're interested in even exist. Now once you see that there's something that exists that might interest you, then you can do a search because you know that the record that you're looking for or the family that you're looking for might possibly be in this record collection. Or you could just continue through with the browse and go directly to the images and look at them one at a time. I do that sometimes just to familiarize myself with the specific collection of records. Okay, next collection of records I just want to briefly talk about are the Michigan death records. There are 8.3 million of these. You'll notice there is a browse over here, so there are images attached to this particular record collection. And so when you come in here, some of them will be just an index depending on the time period and the type of record. So here's a marriage record. Pull this up, or a death record rather, with information about the family. So you have this Violet Adams, whose maiden name was Cowan. So if I searched for her either way, it would come up. Also, if I searched for either of her parents, it's going to give me a record that connects her to her parents. And those relationship proofs are an important part of evidence, which is what we collect as we collect these records. Recognize, though, that you can click on any of the names in this particular indexed record, but the child, it's a record for the child in this case. So the full information is going to be on the child's record. The parent's record is just going to give you a snippet of that information. So always click through those links and make sure you're looking at the record, the full record, for whom this record was created, okay? Hope that made sense. So this is a record, a death index record for Violet Adams. She was 59 at death. She was married. Here's her birth month and year. Here's her death date, month and year, the death place. There is a file number from the state of Michigan if you want to order a copy of the original certificate. That's the information that you need. And somebody might say, well, why would I want to do that? Well, in this case, because the state of Michigan has only provided Ancestry with just an index, there's no image of this death record. And the death record itself, the certificate is going to have more information on it. It's going to have information about why she died. It's going to have information maybe about her husband. It might have information about the informant, the person who gave the information to fill out the death certificate. It's going to have information about where her body was removed to, whether it was buried or cremated, what cemetery she was buried in, what her last residence was, maybe how long she had been living in that particular location. So death certificates have a lot of really great information on them, but the states do not always provide Ancestry with those certificates. They will only provide us with an image in some cases. And so they give you the information you need to order that certificate. Now you'll notice here that some of these records have certificates, actual images attached. Well, that's because of privacy laws. So this particular death record is from 1908. The last one we were looking at was from 1950. So the state of Michigan has some privacy laws in place that do not allow us to publish the images of later records online, but does allow us to publish the images of some of those earlier records online. So where the image exists, always click through and view it, because like I said, there's information on that certificate that is not included in the index. The purpose of the index is just to get you to the record. So those are the Michigan death records. They are just over 8 million of those. Okay, a few other things I want to talk about in our last few minutes here together. Queensland and Victoria Australian directories. If you've done any work in city directories, you know what a lifesaver they are. As a matter of fact, I was just talking with a colleague the other day as we were working on a pretty sticky research problem, and we found the answer in a city directory, and we both noted that happens to us probably several times a week, where we're working on a research problem and the information that ties it all together or that helps prove our case is found in a city directory, tracing individuals by occupation, by address, by who else is living in that house, looking at the city directories to see when somebody disappears as a clue that they might have died. Lots and lots and lots of really great information in these city directories. And so while they may seem like fairly benign listings of individuals, they're actually a really valuable genealogical tool. And so keep in mind that you're going to find people in the city directory collection. So what did I say? There's how many? 26 million records in this one collection, but it covers a huge span of years. And so you may find somebody in 10 or 20 of the city directories, a single individual listed every year over and over and over again. And that's a good thing because it allows you to track them, track their movements, track the structure of their household in absence of other records. In particular for Australia, where there is no available countrywide census, city directories are going to help fill in a huge gap for those of you who are researching families in these particular areas. So Queensland and Victoria, again, I would encourage you to just briefly look at the browse structure to see if the specific town or location that you're interested in is included and what years are included for that particular location. So it looks like here for Queensland, for example, we have territory-wide city directories through the 1860s and 70s and 80s, and then as we get into the mid to later 1900s, we start seeing those broken down into more specific locations. We've got Brisbane specifically for a few things. So just look through those lists and see, or just try your hand at a search and see what comes up. Those are city directories. Okay, next up, if I scroll up this list, I want to talk about Germany and then Mexico. So Germany records, we have been releasing a lot of them, and I'm super excited about this because I have an entire branch of my family tree that is German Lutheran and from some of these areas. So we have 50.7 million records. These are German Württemberg Lutheran baptisms, marriages, and burials from the 1500s through the 1980s. Now, these records are in German. They're German records, but you can search them if you have a global subscription to Ancestry. You can search them on the .com site or from the .co.uk site or the .ca site or the .au site. So whatever country you're in, however you come into Ancestry from whatever portal, if you have a global subscription, you will have access to these German records. So you can search them, but then you need to just be aware that they will be in German, and that you're probably going to need to just be aware of that as you do your searches. So the field names and field information will be in your native language if you're accessing them through whatever site you normally access those records. Some of the common field data, so for example, gender is, there's only a couple of choices, right? Male or female. And so in those cases, you can see Ancestry will translate some of that information. The event type, well, we're looking at baptisms, marriages, and burials. Those are the 3 event types, and so you'll see where Ancestry will translate that as well. However, if you actually come in and view the original record, that's where you're going to see it's going to be in German. Now, don't be too scared by this, however. If you've got the index and you can kind of start to recognize what the fields and what the information is in those fields, you can learn to work with these records really well. Another quick tip is that I often will use Google Translate. If you just go to translate.google.com and I'll just type in, every one of these headers and have it translated for me so that I know exactly what it means, and then I'll write it down on a piece of paper so that I have it next to me as I do this research so that I know what the information is in each of these columns. So the records, the German records are beautiful, they're well kept, they're detailed, so it's fairly easy once you learn how to work with the records and take a little time to do that. It's fairly easy to start connecting families and just really getting into the research of some of these German families and these Lutheran records. So those are the Württemberg records. We also have some additional Lutheran Church records, 1.4 million from a different area of Germany, another 3.6 million German Lutheran records from another area of Germany. So if your family was from any of those places, that's going to be really beneficial to you. That just brings me to a quick tip before we take a peek at the Mexico records, which is if you are researching family overseas, one of the pitfalls that I see a lot of American researchers fall into is saying something like, oh, well, my family's from Ireland or my family's from Germany, so I want to start looking at the Irish records or the German records. Well, that's great, except that in a lot of cases, there are no federal level record collections. We are very lucky here in the United States that we have a federal census that allows us to track people and their movements across time and place, and particularly for those of us who had very mobile families. But it's very difficult to do research in the old country unless you know exactly where in the old country they came from, because as you can see, these records, most of them are going to be very local or regional records. So if you don't have an idea of where they came from, you could find somebody with the same name in the Württemberg records, and that might not actually be your person if your person wasn't actually from there. Okay, so common names are a little bit more of a trap, and you need to know a specific location, which typically just means, that you need to do more research in American records until you can find a town or a more specific location so that you can do that research. So, little tip for doing research in overseas records for those of you who are Americans with immigrant ancestors. Okay, last up, let's talk about these 41.6 million Mexico church records. So this is church registrations, okay? So we have, there's two ways that information gets recorded: civilly, which is by the government. So civil registration, for example, in England started in 1837, where the government started recording birth, marriage, and deaths at a national level for the whole country. We wish we did that in the United States. Here in the U.S., birth, marriage, and death records were typically recorded at a town or a county level until the early 1900s, if they were recorded at all. And then states started passing laws that required those records to be recorded at a state level from, whatever date, 1907, 1932, 1928. It varies by every state at a state level from then on. But there is no national level registration. Okay, so civil or government registration is one level of birth, marriage, and death records that exist. There is then the church or the ecclesiastical registration. Typically, rather than recording a birth, they will record a baptism into whatever particular faith, Catholic records or Church of England or Lutheran or whatever the religious affiliation of the family. So there will be a church registration of baptism that does sometimes include an actual birth date. Then there will be a church registration of marriages and a church registration of burials, okay? So these are the Mexico church records. And one of the benefits of church records for research anywhere in the world, but particularly in countries with strong religious traditions, is that they date back hundreds of years. So you'll notice this particular record collection starts in 15, that's not a typo, 1537. So that is fantastic for those of you who, again, maybe know right in Mexico where your family's from. You can check and see if the specific state that you are interested in is included, then see if the specific city that you are interested in is included, the specific parish. Sometimes there are multiples of them in a single town, and then you can see what registers survive or exist online for that particular location. So in this case, we've got baptisms for the San Bernardo parish in Durango, and we have these years. Now you'll notice there are gaps, okay? So let me make this a little bit bigger so that you can see here in our last few minutes together. There are gaps, and that's an important thing to understand, is that sometimes records have been destroyed, and sometimes it's entire collections, sometimes it's a single kind of record, and sometimes, like you can see here, it may just be a year or two that is missing here and there for whatever reason. It's gotten lost over time or destroyed or damaged in some way, and so those records haven't been recorded. So using this browse box before you start searching, just to familiarize yourself with the structure of the records, is a really important step in research. We want to spend almost as much time understanding and researching the records as we do understanding and researching the lives of the people in our family trees. Well, that's all I have prepared for you today. I hope this has been useful information, that you're as excited as I am to dig into those 145 million new records that have been put online at Ancestry this last month. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.